don't settle, then you melt. Shout.
We were only 7 together for every night.
Pull up,
But we earned a 7 with you.
Hi guys, Yami here. So as I sit at home recovering from my second vaccine shot, I saw that we had a Q1 earnings report from HYBE, and I figured that it might be fun to look through this, see if we can glean some interesting information from this, especially because it's being reported in English. I'm so happy. Let's just go through this and see if there's anything interesting in here. Any earnings report will have a disclaimer saying like, hey, we're just compiling this for our investors. Don't rely on this super hard. This is just to like give you a heads up, blah, blah, blah. Nice logo. Is this what they're going to do now? Okay, so first things first, they're comparing their Q1 income statement earnings and comparing it to the last quarter, and then also comparing it to the last year of Q1. And the reason they do that is because maybe you have a business that's seasonal, and certain times in the year you just have more sales than others. In one of my past Army Finance videos, I talked about how maybe you have seasonality in terms of like people buy more of your stuff at year end during holiday seasons, which I think also applies to music and albums, right? Because lots of people get gifted BTS albums for winter holidays like Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa. That's why they're saying, okay, well, like, we're comparing it to Q4, which included the winter holiday season, but let's also compare it to last year, like the same time last year. How are we doing? So they're saying if you compare it, total revenue earned. I believe this is in millions. So there's 6 more zeros after this. Okay, we're gonna have to look up the exchange rate for this. 178.327 00000. Cool. They have earned in Q1 about $159 million. Let me write that down. So for Q1, they earned $159 million, separated out between artist direct involvement revenue and artist indirect involvement revenue, with the majority of it during a pandemic coming from artist indirect involvement, so all of their IP stuff. Makes sense. And then between the 3 categories of IP, merch took the cake. So over half of the revenue earned from IP was from merch, with the next largest one being content, which is all of the docu-series. Or have they released anything else in this quarter? No, I guess it's people still buying their content. I really don't know what other artists are providing as content on WeVerse these days. And then fan club was all memberships. I mean, still a hefty amount of money. From the artist direct involvement, as I said, we have no concerts, so albums provide the majority of the money that is being made from artist direct involvement revenue. Okay, cool. Makes sense. The amount of money they've spent to generate all this revenue it's pretty high. Like the cost of making all that has been pretty high. It cost them $140 million to earn all of this revenue, which provided them a profit of 19.4. Okay, and so after your operating profit, there are other things that you deduct to get to your net profit, and those are typically your overheads. So things like payroll, utilities, the cost of renting a building or paying electricity, renting cars, things like that. So their overheads are going to be the difference between net profit and operating profit. Where's my trusty calculator? Okay, so basically what I'm seeing is that they've had a really low profit margin this quarter. I'll have to investigate later into how much the average margin is for K-pop companies and in the entertainment industry in general. But right now, I would just think that this looks a little low to me. You've worked really hard all quarter, January through March, and you've made $159 million, but you're only retaining 14 of that. Like, that's a very low margin. How are they doing compared to this time last year? Okay, I've tried to put in some numbers here to have some context. essentially what I'm seeing is that over time, just as HYBE and Big Hit have said, they have tried to steer towards a more IP-driven business so that there's less pressure on their artists. So in the first quarter of 2020, so the beginning of the pandemic, where there was a couple of concerts and then everything was closed off and concerts were canceled. During this time period, BTS sold a shit ton of albums. So this is all the artists mostly that are generating this revenue here. Basically, about 2/3 of the business was revenue generated by the artists, and 1/3 was being generated by all of their IP in terms of their merch, their likeness being licensed for promotional stuff, content, and then the fan club memberships. And then by the end of the year, you can see that percentage start to equalize, where it's pretty much half and half in terms of how revenue is being earned between the artist's direct involvement and indirect involvement. And then in Q1 of this year, basically 2/3 of the business's revenue was generated from IP and only 1/3 from the artists. And that's understandable, considering we still have an ongoing pandemic, so there's very little that artists can do apart from making new albums. And that's why in Q4 of last year, which is where I know BTS had their comeback. Did G-Friend have a comeback? I'm terrible at this because I don't follow those other artists very much. But I think partially because of the year-end holiday season and just because of BTS's comeback, this is where probably the majority of the money came from in terms of albums being sold. We don't really have much detail on operating expenses, so I can't tell you if it's really expensive for them to be making albums or whatever. I do not know if this is a pretty standard margin for a Big Hit to be making. I'll have to look into that. And I mean, granted, they are still making a lot of money and they're able to cover their expenses. I don't know, it seems like they spend a lot of money to earn a lot of money, which is not in itself an inherently bad thing. But yeah, that's pretty much all I can tell you right now. Let's keep going. Oh, okay, so this is them again trying to explain. Here's how much revenue we've earned in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And you can see they've made a shit ton more money in 2020 than in the prior 2 years. So their growth has been amazing. Your profit margin is a way for you to show how efficient are you at making money. Are you making a lot of money and then your costs are ballooning over time and you're not running an efficient business, and you should be focused on cutting costs and figuring out a way to make your albums cheaper or make performances cheaper or manufacture your merch cheaper and ship it to people cheaper so that you don't have as many costs and you get to retain more of your profit. So that's essentially what this profit margin line is showing. It's saying that in 2018, they earned millions, this is billions. Okay, they earned 14 billion won. I think what they're trying to say here is that their margin was really low. It was 2.4%, meaning that of this 14 billion won, they only got to keep 2.4 of it. Let's do some math. Wow, so basically in 2018, their revenue was $12.8 million. Are we comparing Q1? I'm going to guess that we have to be comparing Q1 because I can't imagine that they've only earned $12.8 million for all of 2018, especially since 2018 in May was when Love Yourself Tear came out, right? So that would have been Q2. And then Love Yourself Answer came out in August. That would have been Q3. So I think we have to be just comparing Q1 here. Yeah, that makes way more sense to me. Okay, so then the following year, in Q1 of 2019, which is when I think TXT debuted, right? They came out in Q1 in February, if I remember correctly. That quarter, they earned $70 million between everything. And they had a really sucky profit margin. This is what it sounds like they're saying, that they lost money in that quarter, which isn't good. I wonder why they lost money. Didn't we have talks about them initially trying to do an IPO sometime around this time? Maybe they had been planning on doing it in Q2 of that year, and they were just told to pause or decided it would be a good idea to pause and wait until they had a couple more quarters of growth and good numbers to show for it. Because if they show negative profit in a quarter, that isn't a vote of confidence for them. They made $70 million, but they had so many costs that they had to pay in this quarter that they lost money. And I mean, that also happens sometimes. Like, it could be a timing thing. And maybe they were paying in advance for things related to the concert that was coming up, right? Because you had BTS's Love Yourself, Speak Yourself concerts that began in like March, April, something like that. So maybe they had to pay things in advance. I don't know. This is actually very interesting. I wish I had the details to this. And then in Q1 of 2020, they obviously made a lot more money, and they also got to keep a lot more of it, it seems. I'm sure they've included this in here to show that over time they got their shit together and they grew a lot. You can see that every year they've bounded forward and expanded in terms of the amount of revenue that they've made in Q1, and their margin took a little bit of dip but then has been increasing. Alright, so I think what they were trying to show here is that, hey, let's look at WeVerse and let's talk about WeVerse and its success in terms of the metrics that will make sense to use for WeVerse, using its actual key performance indicators. So for them, they are saying that they need to look at what is their user base and how much money are they making off of it. And they're saying here, hey, we have a really strong user base and we're generating a lot of payment. MAU is monthly active users. And this one, they were kind enough to include the definition down here. Average revenue per paying user. On WeVerse, as you guys know, what we end up buying is merch. We buy access to video-on-demand content. We buy tickets to live-streamed concerts. We buy the memberships. I don't know if the memberships maybe they are included in here because you buy the monthly membership or the yearly membership through WeVerse. So on here, what they were trying to show is that between all the different artists on WeVerse, looking at it quarter over quarter. So here's 2020 Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and Q1 of 2021. When the fuck did WeVerse launch? So WeVerse came out in June of 2019. So since then, we've had Q3, Q4, and then this is where this graph starts. So there's like 2 quarters missing before that. So what they're trying to show here is that between Q1 and Q3 of last year, they basically doubled the amount of people on WeVerse. And I bet it's related to the fact that they put more artists on there, because every time you add an artist, more people want to check it out so they can check out their artist. They're still growing slightly, but at the very least, they're trying to say that they've maintained the amount of active users they have monthly. Like, they haven't fucked up and made it uninteresting and made people want to leave. They've at least kept their interest. And now they're slowly trying to figure out how to grow that interest even more. And then in terms of all those people, how much money do we spend in the WeVerse shop? We've spent a lot of money. I don't know what the dollar figure on this is, but I guess with the way they're showing it here is it doesn't really matter. All you need to know is that WeVerse was born in June, so this was the first quarter that it was actually active. They've basically gone up since then, and then they've had a bit of a dip in Q1 of this year, which is understandable because I don't really remember that much content being available. Obviously, my experience is tailored to BTS, but I still think that the majority of WeVerse users are BTS fans. They are ARMY, so we do drive a lot of what happens on that app. We, of course, drive the revenue. Let's see, Q2 or Q3 was where In the Soup came out. All of us lost our minds over that, and then all the merch related to that. We've had a lot of merch. Q4 again it's the last quarter of the year. You have all the year-end winter holidays. I'm sure people bought a lot of stuff for that. And then in Q1, I would say that maybe, I don't know, people just dipped in their spending after spending all that money last year. But I mean, still overall, in general, it's still more than the beginning. So I'm sure HYBE was trying to say, like, we have a sustainable platform and we have, like, stable growth in terms of how much money we're making, and we're still maintaining the amount of people using it and still slowly growing it. Like, we've stabilized the platform, and now we're going to try and keep making it a quality platform that people want to use with things they want to buy on it. Oh, this is them talking about their reorganization, where they're saying Big Hit Music is just going to be a label like the other ones. And it's going to operate similarly to how the other labels under HYBE operate. Like, they all pretty much have their own management and are independent and are just doing their own thing. And the money that they make, rolls up into HYBE. Ithaca. So this is what I talked about in a previous video. HYBE acquired Ithaca Holdings for $1.1 billion. whew. And then they explain here that the reason for this acquisition was they want to expand HYBE artist IP, which I could understand as they want to make IP for all these artists that were formerly under Ithaca. I mean, yeah, like I don't think in the US we have a big maker of merch for artists. Usually each artist who has merch does it individually, or they outsource it to like an external t-shirt company, or they partner with a brand to make one specific item, like a certain shoe or something like that. And it's like a limited time offer. But maybe HYBE was thinking, hey, we have this WeVerse platform, let's bring more artists to it and let's make merch for them, because there's clearly demand for that. People want to buy things that are tailored towards their artist and their artist concepts and all of that. Portfolio diversification and additional business capabilities, which is exactly what I said in my last video, that they just want to have more artists. HYBE wants to have more artists under their umbrella. And they are hoping to get resources and connections and supply chain management capabilities through Ithaca. Acceleration of global market expansion. Yep, they want to break further into the US music market. Again, like I said in my last video, they just want to make it a push towards them becoming the #1 entertainment lifestyle platform company. And then this is just talking about what rolls up under Ithaca. And then they talk about, well, who are Ithaca artists? Okay, cool. We know who Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande are. So I think this section is just for HYBE to show that, like, this was a good business idea for them to do. Now, all of the revenue that those artists make will now somehow roll up under HYBE. I don't really know what the agreements that Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande had with Ithaca, like who was in charge of producing their albums, how much money was Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande taking away from it, how much the label was taking away from it, how much the third party who was manufacturing those albums was taking away from it. I don't really know all of that. This is the Scooter Brown Projects. And this is Machine Label. Yeah, so I don't know what the arrangement was. So the way they're showing it here is they're literally just showing the units of, like, look at these artists and look how many album units they sold in the last year. And some portion of that will convert into money, into revenue that is now going to be showing up on HYBE income statements. Anyway, this is them talking about fandom expansion. And the reason they do that is because for a music company, your fandom is your audience, and your audience are your consumers who buy your albums and stream the music and watch the content and buy the merch. So any indication that shows that there's more people who are listening to you and following you and watching your stuff, the better. Now that we've acquired Ithaca, this is them saying, hey, YouTube channels, HYBE labels, Bang 10 TV, 17, TXT, and Hypin, GFriend, New East, In the Soup, Pledis, whatever. All of that is 120 million subscribers. If you add in Ithaca, that's 290 million subscribers. What is the math? 170 million subscribers follow Ithaca artists. BTS has the #1 most viewed video in 24 hours with 100 million views, which is related to Dynamite's release, Go Us.
You win.
700 million views from 7 different videos, which are all BTS videos. DNA, Boy With Love, Fake Love, Dynamite, Mic Drop, Idol, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Hell yeah! It's nice that Big Hit sees this and appreciates us and shows us off so proudly. Social channels, which is inclusive of all of HYBE group channels on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, VLive, Facebook, Weibo. 440 million followers between all of that, which is amazing. And then if you add in Ithaca followers on all of those platforms, we get to 1.26 billion followers.
Oh my god.
So this is adding in 820 million followers on all of that. Essentially, between all of this, what HYBE is trying to say is that look how many more people we are going to be reaching to market and promote our albums, our artists, and their content towards. That's great business strategy for an entertainment company, for a music company. It's a very promising increase. So basically here it sounds like HYBE is trying to justify their $1.1 billion transaction. Down here, this is just, again, I think what we saw before in maybe a little more detail. Here's our consolidated income statement, Q1, and then the last year, all the quarters trailing. I don't feel like converting all of these currencies into dollars. They had growth. End of the year, they made a shit ton of money, probably from the sale of B and then also just year-end sales. They're obviously higher than this time last year, but it's kind of like a bit more normalized. And then the gross margin has gone up and then stabilized right in line with the revenue. So all of this is pretty healthy. It's showing stable growth for a company during a pandemic, which is phenomenal. And then SG&A is overheads. Those went up over the course of last year, and now they've also kind of stabilized. So over the course of the year, their payroll went up, so they started hiring more people. The pandemic pretty much went into the full swing of things between Q1 and Q2 in like March, April, something like that. And it sounds like they didn't lay anyone off. They actually continued to have those people and maybe even hire more. So good for them. Logistics cost is like shipping and transportation of stuff. Depreciation and amortization costs. This is if they bought anything that depreciates. I'm sure if you buy like big stage equipment, like for concerts, that depreciates, but we haven't had any concerts. So I don't know. I wonder what this is for. The rent has gone up. They're renting their new HYBE building, right? They didn't buy it, or did they buy it? I can't remember. But if they didn't buy it, then I think that would be why the rent went up. Their margin went up, dipped in Q4, which means that their revenue did not increase proportionately with their costs. Sometimes this can happen when like you reach the limit of how much merch some manufacturing plant is creating for you. Like if you have a factory that makes your sweatshirts and you have a contract with them for them to make like 100,000 sweatshirts that say BTS on them. And that's what you think will be the demand in WeVerse. But then in Q4, people are like, I also want this sweatshirt. And you just have a shit ton more people, armies show up and go, I want this sweatshirt that says BTS on it. So of course, as a company, you're going to say, yeah, buy it. We'll go figure out how to get it manufactured. And you come back to that plant and say, hey, I know our contract was only for 100,000 sweatshirts, but now I need 300,000 more. And then the plant will be like, well, we've already like factored in what we're making for you and all our other contracts. So what you're asking us to do is outside of our norm. We have to go find more material. We have to find the time. People are going to have to work overtime to get this done for you. So it's going to cost more now per sweatshirt than it did for the original 1,000. So that can be one of the reasons why your cost of sales goes up, but your revenue didn't go up at the same rate. Yeah, I just think Q1 was kind of a slow quarter for them, and all they were doing was selling merch. But yeah, so they're doing good. They're showing stable growth year over year. All right, well, that's it. Basically, an earnings report is just kind of like an FYI for investors to reassure them that the business is doing good, it's growing. Here's a review of the things it's just done in its last quarter. Here are the things that it's going to do in quarters going forward or just for the rest of the year. And it's just supposed to inspire confidence in investors and in the market in general. There's like a streamed version of this where you have the C-suite executives talk about this slideshow and explain it. And it's usually very vague stuff because they don't want to give away too many like company secrets. And they don't want to say anything that might be construed as misleading people or untrue. So it's usually a very like vague cover your ass presentation. But if you analyze the documents like the way we have here, you can glean a bunch of like information about the company. And what I gather from this is that Big Hit is doing fine. It's growing. The decisions that it made to pursue more IP and put less pressure on their artists have been good because in a world cataclysmic event like a pandemic, they had already been on track to create more IP. So they were able to continue growing. This is crazy. Like over the last year, they were still able to grow quarter over quarter. And they were still able to make a bunch of money. They were still able to support lots of people. It seems like they hired more people in their company during a pandemic. Overall, that's what I get out of this without being able to speak Korean and listening in. But yeah, hope this was helpful. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments or on Twitter. See you next time, guys.